Ben, it's fantastic to have you here, and we're absolutely thrilled, as already has been said, that this picture is the subject of this year's appeal. So going into Afghanistan, because you'd obviously have those weeks thinking about how I was going to do this and how I was going to engage with the service personnel that were there. Did you think initially it would be making and taking sketches and taking them out and then working up portraits in the studio? Did you actually think ahead that I need to get these guys back, or was that something that came later?
Most of my body of work has been exploring notions of who I am, as self-portraiture in a broader sense about who young men are in our culture. And in a way, these young men are the very extreme extension of what happens to young men in our society. And I felt more than a desire, I felt a responsibility to tell that story. Yeah. My experience of war was my uncle who went to Vietnam, who we grew up never just knowing that we could never talk to him about his experience there. Yeah. So I had no experience and I didn't know what I was going into. So I took everything, cameras and a computer, lots of drawing materials, as much as I could carry, and I just started working and trying to fit it in between getting them into a quiet part of the base, a safe, quiet part in the sun was a good thing to do, and then talking to them, and they all want to talk, they all want to tell you what, once they trust that I have their best interests at heart, they wanted to tell the story of what they were witnessing. Then you quickly realise that night, the first night that I landed in Kandahar, the base was rocketed 3 times and I had to go through the whole rocket drill, which is actually a very terrifying experience. You suddenly realise that there's this very beautiful landscape with an extremely heavy human darkness hovering over it, and that was the start of the show, and definitely my feeling that there was a big story to tell.
The first things you do is to take your camera out, to take your sketch pad out. You start sort of engaging with individual soldiers that you meet. How does that kind of meeting come about? How do they know who you are to kind of be able to stop what they're doing to respond to your desire to perhaps get them to, just to sit to you even for a moment? I
immediately started trying to work out how to stay in the background but to be given opportunities to meet these young, often very young people. And after a week I had a lot of friends and they trusted me. I think they felt like I was one of them in a sense.
All of that material that you produce there, the photographs and the drawings and sketches and so on, you get that back home, you're in the studio. What happens? How hard is it to get from that point of capturing this kind of raw, visceral data that you're getting out of the field, and then you're in the peace and quiet of a northern New South Wales rural town, no shots being fired, no danger. How do you get that unpacked into a painting like this?
I made 2 or 3 good paintings that are in the show that I like very much, but then I felt like the truth had walked out the door, so I invited all of my subjects to come to Robertson, to the town that I'm in, and to come to my studio and spend a day or 2. But these fellows came to me with that weight, with the intense emotional trauma, and none of them had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder when I met them all. Since then, now 5 are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder out of 11 people. In fact, only 4, and 1, I'm sure, is suffering and won't be diagnosed. One of the young fellows, in fact the youngest, has attempted suicide twice since I met him, and he was 19 years old when I met him. So in some ways the trauma, as I worked, unveiled itself, and in some ways the experience of having seen that for me was more confronting than being in Afghanistan.
Yeah. And I feel that with these paintings, you've drawn something of that same psychological dimension of your sitters out over and above the physical dimension that clearly sits there on the canvas. I found myself very deeply moved by.
I find it hard to look at.
Yeah, I can understand why painting work of this kind must be exhausting. Just in closing, I think you've given Australia and these Australian servicemen and women a remarkable gift of insight into the conditions that they endure and the experiences that they've taken out of that theatre of war. And for most of us, we're very fortunate that it's not an experience that we have. But it's incredibly important that we understand the impact that it has on these young lives. And I think that the Australian War Memorial chose well. And I'm very proud that this is a picture that hopefully with the support of the public of Queensland that we can see eventually come into the collections of the Queensland Art Gallery. I'm confident it will. I heartily commend it to you and I thank you for coming.